tracking things the government swears don't exist. But I finally realized they weren't just letting me watch them. They were waiting for me to understand. Last October, I found a hidden cedar weave containing a message meant only for a man who never brought a camera or a gun. What I learned contradicts every official report and campfire myth ever told. And though I promised to take this to my grave, the shadows are changing. You deserve the truth before it's silenced for good. The air up here at 7,000 feet carries a weight most people never feel. It's not just the thinning oxygen, it's the density of the history pressed into the granite and the pine needles. I've sat on this same porch since the Ford administration, watching the light crawl across the ridgeline, keeping my mouth shut while the world moved on towards cell phones and satellites. But the secret I've been guarding is starting to feel like a physical burden, a stone in my chest that gets heavier with every season. Why now? Why after half a century am I finally breaking the silence? It's because the agreement has changed. The mountain isn't just watching anymore, it's reacting. I've lived a quiet life, making my way as a guide and a tracker, seeing things that would make a sane man question his own eyes. I've seen the way the light bends around a shape that's too large to be a bear, and I've heard the rhythmic thrumming that makes your teeth ache before you even realize you're not alone. I've always believed that some things are better left in the dark, but last winter, the dark started coming toward the light. I realized that the end of my journey was approaching, and if I didn't speak, the truth about what's actually living in the high country would be buried under 6 feet of Sierra dirt. What I found in that cedar weave wasn't just a collection of sticks. It was a deliberate arrangement, a piece of communication that spoke to me in a way no human voice ever could. It made me realize that my entire 50-year history here wasn't just a series of random encounters. It was an education. But to understand the message they left for me, you have to understand where this all began. Back when I was young enough to be reckless and arrogant enough to think I was the top predator in these manzanita thickets. The year was 1974. I was 24 years old, carrying a heavy pack and a sense of invincibility. I was tracking an elk through a drainage that the locals called the Devil's Wash, a place where the stunted subalpine fir grows so thick the sun barely hits the forest floor. I remember the smell of dry pine and the way the dust hung in the shafts of light. I'd been on the trail for 3 days, but something felt off. The forest was too loud, then too quiet. I found the elk, or what was left of it. It hadn't been taken by an animal. In the way I understood, the rib cage had been peeled back like the lid of a tin can, and the heavy leg bones had been snapped with a clean force that no grizzly could manage. As I knelt there, the temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. I felt a gaze on the back of my neck, so intense, it felt like a physical touch. I didn't turn around immediately. I listened. There was no snapping of twigs, no heavy breathing, just a total, absolute stillness. When I finally turned, I didn't see a monster. I saw a shadow that was darker than the shade of the trees, standing 8 feet tall against a granite outcropping. It didn't growl. It didn't charge. It just stood there, watching me with eyes that reflected the dim light like burnished copper. In that moment, the laws of biology I'd learned in school simply evaporated. I was looking at something that wasn't supposed to exist, yet it was the most real thing I'd ever seen. Every instinct told me that my life was at a turning point. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours, though it was likely only minutes. Then, with a fluid grace that defied its massive size, it stepped backward and vanished into the brush. It didn't run. It simply ceased to be visible. I went back to my camp, but I didn't sleep. I realized then that I had passed a threshold. I had been seen, and more importantly, I had been allowed to leave. But I didn't know that I had just passed a test I didn't even know I was taking. By 1976, I had stopped trying to hunt the mystery and started trying to live with it. I learned that the high country has its own set of laws, written in signs that most people walk right over. I started noticing the boundary markers, young saplings twisted into complex knots while the wood was still green, or heavy boulders moved into patterns that followed the curve of the terrain. I realized that if I crossed a certain ridge without asking, the forest would erupt in a series of wood knocks that sounded like a sledgehammer hitting a hollow oak. It was a language of a territory. I began leaving small tokens, pieces of fruit or polished river stones, on a specific flat stump near the creek. However, there was a night in 1977 when I grew overconfident. I crossed into a box canyon I hadn't been invited to, and the response was a physical assault of sound. The wood knocks weren't rhythmic anymore. They were aggressive, rapid-fire strikes that shook the ground beneath my boots. A rock the size of a bowling ball whistled past my ear, shattering a cedar trunk behind me. It was a terrifying reminder that I was a guest on sufferance, not a peer. I retreated, humbled, realizing that the communication I'd receive in the winter of 2025 started with these harsh boundaries. They were watching my habits, my movements, and my intentions. If I brought a rifle, the forest stayed empty. If I went in with open hands, I would catch glimpses of them moving parallel to me in the tree line. It was a pact of non-aggression, a fragile peace that depended entirely on my willingness to respect their privacy. I started to see that they were sentient in a way that challenged everything we think we know about intelligence. But as the years went on, I realized I wasn't the only one trying to learn their secrets. There are nights in the Sierras when the world goes dead silent. Not the normal quiet of a calm night, but a vacuum of sound where even the insects stop their chirping. That's when the hum starts. I first felt it in the early 80s. It's not a sound you hear with your ears. It's a vibration you feel in the marrow of your bones and the pit of your stomach. It's infrasound, low-frequency waves that can trigger a sense of primal dread in the human brain. I've sat in my cabin with the door bolted, feeling a sudden, overwhelming urge to run, to hide, to end my own presence in that space, because the air itself felt hostile. My teeth would ache, and my vision would blur at the edges. Outside, I knew they were there. They use this frequency to paralyze prey or to drive intruders away without ever having to show themselves. It's a biological weapon, a way of projecting their will across the forest. One night, the hum became so intense that a glass on my table shattered, and for a split second, I saw a geometric spark dance in the air, a glitch in the darkness. Then, the silence was broken by a vocalization that I can only describe as a Sasquatch scream, a multi-tonal roar that started low and escalated into a metallic, bird-like shriek. It vibrated the very floorboards beneath my feet. It wasn't a roar of anger, it was a roar of command. They were clearing the area. I looked out the window and saw a pale, shimmering light move through the trees near Black Ridge. It wasn't a flashlight or a lantern. It was a soft, bioluminescent glow that seemed to cling to their fur. I realized then that they weren't just scaring me. They were masking something. They were moving something through the valley that they didn't want anyone, not even their trusted neighbor, to witness. The interference started in the mid-90s. I began seeing black SUVs with government plates, parked on old logging roads that had been decommissioned for 20 years. Men in tactical gear, carrying equipment that didn't look like standard survey tools, started appearing on the fringes of my property. They called themselves biological survey teams, but they didn't care about the owls or the deer. They were looking for the anomaly. I found one of their sensors hidden inside a hollowed-out log near the creek. It was a sophisticated piece of tech, a high-frequency acoustic monitor designed to pick up the very infrasound I'd been feeling. But when I found it, it had been crushed. Not by a hammer, but by a grip that had flattened the steel casing like it was made of foil. I also found something else, a small, black box transmitter left by the government agents. It was emitting a specific frequency, a kill switch, designed to disrupt the natural communication of the creatures. It was an act of aggression. I found a shred of black tactical fabric snagged on a manzanita branch just 50 yards from my cabin, a cold reminder that the predators were now wearing boots and carrying badges. The feds were trying to force them out of the shadows, to provoke a response they could document and contain. I saw the creatures' reaction firsthand. They didn't attack the men, they attacked the infrastructure. Bridges were undermined, and the survey teams found their camp gear hanging from the tops of 100-foot pines. The tension in the valley was a physical thing. If you want to know what the government is really hiding in these mountains, you need to hit that subscribe button right now, because we're just getting to the part of the story they tried to redact from history. By the turn of the millennium, I had reached a point where I could mimic the whistle clicks I heard at dusk. It's a complex system of communication that involves rapid-fire pops and high-pitched slides that carry for miles through the canyons. One evening, sitting on a rock overlooking a deep ravine, I let out a sequence I'd been practicing. For a long time, there was nothing. Then, from the opposite ridge, a response came back. It wasn't an echo. It was a variation on my theme, a correction. It was a dialogue. Over the next few months, the clicks became more frequent. I realized they weren't just talking about food or danger. They were sharing information about me. Even as we spoke, I could hear the distant, unnatural hum of a generator echoing from the forest. The feds were still out there, listening to our conversation from their hidden camps. One morning, I found a stone on my porch. It was a piece of obsidian, polished until it shone like a mirror. I had never seen obsidian in this part of the range. They had brought it from hundreds of miles away. It was a receipt, a sign that my attempts at communication had been accepted. But once you start talking to the mountain starts telling you things you aren't ready to hear. I began to feel a shift in the language of the grey. The whistles were becoming more urgent, less rhythmic. There was a sense of mourning in the sounds that drifted down from the high peaks. I started to lose touch with the human world. My trips into town became shorter, the noise of the cars and the television feeling like an assault on my senses. I preferred the company of the giants who said everything without saying a word. The more I observed them, the more I realized that the Bigfoot isn't an animal in any sense we understand. I'd watched a massive male move through a stand of lodgepole pines that were barely 5 feet apart, and he did it without a single branch swaying. It was like he was desynchronized from the physical world. I've seen their fur in the morning light. It's not just hair, it's a complex structure that seems to absorb light and heat. I realized why the drones and the thermal cameras the government used always came up empty. They have a thermal masking capability built into their very biology. Their skin doesn't radiate heat the way ours does. It recycled it. I found one of their bedding sites in a deep box canyon. Most people expect a nest of filth, but it was pristine. It smelled of ozone and fresh-cut cedar. There were no remains of prey that had been taken, no waste. It was like they left no footprint on the reality of the forest. I found a single hair snagged on a branch. It was thick, translucent, and when I touched it, it felt like it was vibrating with a faint electrical charge. Beside the bedding, I found a government-issued cigarette butt, still fresh. They were being hunted by something much more clinical than a mountain lion. Their bodies were built to stay hidden, but their history was being kept hidden by a much more deliberate force. Last October, the nature of our relationship changed forever. I found the cedar branch weave. It was a massive structure, 6 feet across, woven from living branches that had been bent and tied while still on the tree. It was a piece of high-precision geometry. Inside the weave, tucked into a pocket of moss, was a map. Not a map of the trails or the rivers, but a map of the sky. It was made of different-sized river stones, glued together with a clear, resinous sap. It showed the positions of stars that shouldn't be visible from this hemisphere, arranged in a way that suggested a journey. I spent days staring at it, trying to decode the message in the cedar. This wasn't a warning for me to stay away. I thought it was a gift. I was wrong. It was a summons to a location I had avoided for 50 years, the Forbidden Ridge. It's a place where the air always feels heavy, where the compasses spin in circles, and where the feds have installed more sensors than anywhere else in the park. I realized that the creatures were tired of hiding. They were choosing a witness. They had picked the one man who had respected the pact, the one who had never tried to prove they existed to a world that would only want to put an end to their freedom. The walk to the Forbidden Ridge took me 2 days. I followed the game trails, keeping the wind in my face so the mountain wouldn't smell me before I arrived. I went without a rifle, without a camera, and without a GPS. I trusted the mountain to guide me. When I reached the summit clearing, I found them waiting. There were 3 of them, an elder with fur the color of winter frost, and 2 younger males who stood like guardians on either side. The physical presence of an adult Sasquatch at close range is something that cannot be described. The ground literally vibrates with their breathing. Their eyes aren't the dull eyes of a primate. They are amber-colored windows of deep, ancient intelligence. I felt a transfer of information, not words, but a series of images and sensations that flooded my mind. They showed me the history of this land before the concrete and the wires. They showed me the keep, a place deep beneath the granite where the Earth's frequency is regulated. I realized that they aren't cryptids or monstrosities. They are the maintenance crew of the planet. It sounds crazy, even to me. I've spent my life tracking flesh and bone, but what they showed me, it wasn't biology. It was something older. Just as the information flooded in, the low thrum of a helicopter blade began to beat against the canyon walls below us. The feds were close. They knew I had been summoned. The government doesn't want to protect Bigfoot. They want to harness the technology they protect. They want the power of the keep, and the creatures are the only things standing in their way. What I learned that night at the Revelation Peak changed everything. Bigfoot isn't an ape. It's the original guardian of a technology we've long forgotten. They led me to a cave entrance that didn't look like a natural formation. The edges were too straight, the stone too smooth. It looked mechanical, but grown, like a fusion of geology and engineering that the earth itself had formed. Inside, the walls hummed with a low golden light that made the air feel electric and hot. My flashlight flickered and died the moment I stepped over the threshold, as if the battery had been drained in a single second. I saw symbols etched into the stone that looked like ancient Sanskrit, but they glowed with a soft heat. They showed me that the earth is a living machine, and we are breaking the gears. The reason for the increase in sightings is because the balance is failing. The keep is being depleted by our industrial hunger, and the creatures are becoming desperate. They asked me to never tell this truth because they knew the world wasn't ready. They knew that if men found out about the power beneath the mountains, they would bring about the end of the natural order to get it. But the situation has become so dire that the risk of silence is now greater than the risk of the truth. What do you think these creatures really are? Guardians, or something even more mysterious? Tell me your theories in the comments and let me know which mountain mystery I should tackle next. When I returned from the ridge, I found my cabin had been tossed, not by a bear, but by professionals. My journals were gone, my old maps were scattered, and a small black box transmitter had been planted in my woodpile. The feds knew where I'd been. They couldn't follow me to the ridge. The frequency there would have fried their electronics, but they were waiting for the messenger to return. I realized then that I was being watched by a power far more dangerous than anything in the woods. I remembered an old tracking partner of mine who went missing in 1982. He had started talking about the black SUVs, and then he just vanished. The Department of the Interior isn't just a bureaucracy, it's a gatekeeper. They have spent decades suppressing the frequency truth because it would dismantle our entire energy economy. If people knew the earth provided its own power through the keep, the empires of oil and coal would collapse. I started seeing unmarked helicopters flying low over my valley at night. They aren't looking for Sasquatch to put them in a zoo. They are looking for the entrance I found. I realized I couldn't keep the secret from the creatures anymore. The government's invisible wall is closing in, and they are losing the war of attrition. The warning they gave me was specific. They didn't break the promise. The world did. They showed me the dry wells of the earth, areas where the natural frequency has been so disrupted that the land is becoming a place where life cannot thrive. Sightings are increasing because they are looking for new anchors, new places to hold the line. They told me that 2026 would be the year of the Great Shimmer, a time when the veil between our world and theirs would become so thin that everyone would see the truth, whether they wanted to or not. They are coming out because they are the only ones who can fix the gears, but we are standing in their way with our cameras and our greed. The sadness in their vocalizations that I'd heard for years finally made sense. It wasn't mourning for themselves. It was mourning for us. We are the children who have set the house on fire, and the parents are deciding if it's worth trying to save us or if they should just let the house reach its natural end. I've spent 50 years as a hermit, a guide, and a guardian. I've sacrificed having a wife, a family, and a normal life to sit on this porch and watch the shadows. People ask me if I'm lonely. I tell them I've never been alone a day in my life. I've had the company of the most intelligent beings on the planet, but the cost of the secret has been high. I've spent my winters in the damp timber, developed arthritis that makes every step a trial, and I've lived with a level of paranoia that would break most men. I've kept stacks of journals, documenting every click, every track, and every hum. I've realized that I am the only bridge left between two worlds that are about to collide. The weight of that responsibility is what's been making my chest ache. I've realized that my purpose wasn't just to watch them. It was to be the one who could tell the story when the time came. I wouldn't trade these 50 years for all the comfort in the world. I've seen the amber eyes of the mountain, and I know that the world is much more beautiful and terrifying than any scientist could ever admit. Now, I am nearing the end of my time here. I'm preparing my final journals, the ones the feds didn't get, and I'm leaving them for the right person to find. I went for one last walk to the tree line yesterday. I didn't see them, but I felt them. I found a final gift on the flat stump, a piece of fur that was perfectly white, and when I touched it, it made my hand go numb with a pleasant, rhythmic vibration. It was a goodbye. I've told you what they said. I've broken the promise, because the promise was made to a world that no longer exists. If you believe the truth deserves to be out there, and if you think we need to stop the forces that are trying to harvest the Earth's lifeblood, like and share this video. The more eyes we have on these mountains, the harder it is for the black SUVs and the unmarked helicopters to operate in the dark. We are the only defense these guardians have left. I'm sitting on my porch now, and the sun is dipping below the high peaks of the Sierras. The forest is starting to go quiet, and I can feel the first faint traces of the hum beginning in the valley floor. The mystery isn't over. It's only just begun for you. Now that you know the truth about the keep and the guardians, you'll never look at a stand of trees the same way again. You'll start noticing the twisted saplings. You'll start feeling the vibration in your teeth before a storm. You'll realize that they aren't lost in the woods. We are. They are exactly where they've always been, holding the world together while we try our best to pull it apart. My name is Dave Mitchell, and I've been the neighbor of the giants for 50 years. I'm going inside now to close my eyes, but I know they'll be out there, watching the stars and waiting for the great Shimmer. This investigation into the truth of the high country doesn't end here. The shadows in these timberlines are moving differently tonight, and I get the feeling the mountain is only just beginning to speak its piece. If you're ready to follow me deeper into the places most folks are too afraid to go, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I want to hear your theories in the comments below. What do you think they're truly guarding up there? Share this with anyone who isn't afraid of the truth, because I'll be out here watching the ridgeline until the final shimmer. Rest assured, I'm not the only one keeping count.